we take it very much for granted today in the West especially that the arts should be autonomous. We should enjoy our freedoms. And I think that the best epitome of this perception is perhaps captured by an anecdote about Picasso and Gertrude Stein, the American writer. Picasso painted Gertrude Stein very predictably in fragments and in these very cubist contorted shapes. And when Gertrude Stein saw the painting, she was absolutely out of her wits. She said, "Pablo, but this painting is not me. It doesn't look like me at all." "Relax," said Picasso. "It will." Now, this is an anecdote which I think captures our assumption that what the artist does, what the Western artist after the Romantic discovery of the genius of imagination does, is of course his licentia poetica, as it's called. He has the poetic license to do anything he pleases. The second paradox in this assumption is of course that it's not going to be the real Gertrude Stein that the posterity will remember. It is going to be Picasso's Gertrude Stein. So there's a kind of a lack of justice in our historical perceptions that after all, what we remember in the end, it will be Picasso's Gertrude Stein and not Gertrude Stein as she was in real life. So there is an interesting question. There is this freedom and this autonomy that we take for granted, which is also, I would say, and that's my own interpretation, is part of the humanist project which is cruel by nature. Actually, very few people realize that there is something like a cruelty inscribed in this humanist project of mankind, which includes the author's, the painter's autonomy. It has yielded many victims. It's enough to remember people like Natalia Gorbanevska, the Russian poet, who was, like very many of her compatriots, thrown forcibly into the psychiatric asylum and zombified and toxified and poisoned for the rest of her life. It's enough to remember people like Mandelstam, or who perished in the gulags, or Brodsky, who was thrown out of the circulation of the normal life, or the African poets such as Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was hanged by the Nigerian regime. So in other words, we have here a very bad track record with regard to the autonomy of art in the modern world. We also have to remember the totalitarian gods such as Stalin and Mao and Hitler, who actually tried to sponsor atrocities and the surveillance of art in all respects. So this we have to keep in mind as a kind of a grim background of the subject matter we are going to talk about. Now, Joseph Brodsky, whom I already mentioned, the Russian dissident poet and the Nobel Prize laureate, insisted that the poet has no obligation to a society at all. The only obligation he has is to write well and to leave a future behind. Not the past, but the future. In other words, to have this third eye, to be a clairvoyant in a sense of a society. Now, according to our guest Amir Baraka, the artist has a clear obligation. It is to raise the consciousness of the people. So there would be a very fertile disagreement here. There are a few other questions that need to be broached in the context of this discussion today. What are the main threats to the autonomy of literature today, both in the North and in the South? In particular, for example, does the recent decree of the United Nations, which announced a formal struggle against religious defamation, does this decree mean a shift of focus from the freedom of expression to the surveillance of free speech? And does it mean, in effect, for the Norwegians that from now on the Norwegian foreign policy will exclude the empathy with the victims of the freedom of speech? I mean, at least the official empathy. Now, secondly, should the autonomy of the arts have boundaries in the ethnically inflamed context of our global village, in these very fragile multicultural societies? Should we draw or draft boundaries, boundaries decided by, say, responsibility, especially vis-à-vis the ethnic minorities, by morality, or simply by good taste? So these are some of the questions which are going to be addressed, and I'm very happy to have a very good circle of good minds and good pens today. I have, first of all, the privilege to introduce our first speaker today, who is the Danish poet and writer, Niels. Niels has been a bit of an enigma to me for some time now, but at last I've been forced by Birgit to read what he's written. So first of all, he has to be congratulated because he got the Critics' Prize this year in 2008 for his recent collection of essays, Everything Else is a Lie. Now, there was another collection, I understand, Life in the Tropics, published in 1998, when I found a very striking definition of art. Whatever cannot criticize itself, or transcend itself, or destroy itself is, according to Niels, not art. Now, this is an interesting restatement of the Bakhtini's dialogical imagination, as some of you might remember. Now, Niels has said some of the premises for this debate today. He has written an essay on the status quo in the arts literally, after the Muhammad caricatures, which was another act of losing innocence with regard to the autonomy and freedom of speech. And in this essay, you make a point that, I quote you, art which insists on its autonomy runs the risk of ending up as a limited, local, provincial art with no understanding of the context it belongs to. Now, I think this sounds provocative enough to start a proper discussion. Could you elaborate on that?